Everyone in the neighborhood knew Walter from the 24-hour mart. Always friendly, always patient, even with the drunk customers at 3 a.m. Just another elderly cashier working the night shift to pay the bills. Until that terrifying evening when armed robbers chose the wrong store, and suddenly the old man everyone overlooked became their worst nightmare. Walter Eugene Thompson had worked the graveyard shift at Murphy's Corner Store for 4 years, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week, serving a neighborhood that never quite slept. He was 67 years old, 5'9" with a slight stoop, silver hair that had thinned to wisps, and wire-rimmed glasses that he constantly adjusted on his nose. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this incredible tale of hidden strength and unexpected heroism, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories about overlooked guardians deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Murphy's Corner Store sat at the intersection of Corktown and Southwest Detroit, in a neighborhood that had survived urban decay through sheer stubbornness, the kind of place where elderly residents had watched their community change around them but refused to give up on it. Walter fit right in, another senior citizen just trying to make his Social Security stretch a little further. The customers saw him as a harmless old man who moved slowly, counted change carefully, and always had time for small talk. Mrs. Patterson from down the block would stop by for her evening medications and chat about her grandchildren. Bobby, the young mechanic from the garage next door, would grab energy drinks and tell Walter about his plans to open his own shop someday. "Evening, Mr. Walter. How you holding up tonight?" "Can't complain, son. These old bones keep moving, so I keep moving with them." "You should be retired, relaxing somewhere warm." "Retirement's overrated. Besides, who'd keep an eye on you troublemakers?" These conversations happened dozens of times each shift. Walter had become the neighborhood's unofficial grandfather, someone who remembered everyone's stories and genuinely cared about their lives. He'd slip candy to kids whose parents weren't looking, let customers short on cash pay him back later, and always had a kind word for people having rough days. What the neighborhood didn't know was that Detective Walter Thompson had spent 30 years keeping the streets of Detroit safe before he ever stood behind that register. His small apartment 3 blocks away looked exactly like what you'd expect from a widower on a fixed income. Modest furniture, outdated appliances, photographs of his late wife Dorothy scattered around the living room. But in the bedroom closet, behind boxes of Dorothy's things he couldn't bring himself to donate, was a footlocker containing items from another life. A Detroit Police Department badge, still bright after 40 decades. Commendations for bravery, including one for talking a gunman out of shooting hostages during a bank robbery in 1987. Training certificates from the FBI's Crisis Negotiation Program. Newspaper clippings about cases he'd solved, lives he'd saved, criminals he'd brought to justice. Detective Walter Thompson, Detroit PD. 30 years on the force, the last 15 as a specialist in de-escalation and crisis intervention. A career that ended with full honors in 2015 when Dorothy's cancer made early retirement the only choice that mattered. He thought his days of protecting people were over. Then Dorothy passed in 2019, and the silence in their apartment became unbearable. The night shift at Murphy's gave him somewhere to go, something to do, and, though he never admitted it, people to watch over. Working nights in an urban convenience store meant encountering the same kinds of situations he'd handled as a detective: domestic disputes spilling into public spaces, drug deals gone wrong, and people in mental health crises with nowhere else to turn. The difference was that now he helped with patience instead of authority, with conversation instead of handcuffs. Walter had prevented more violence working at Murphy's than he ever had carrying a badge. A quiet word to a customer whose anger was escalating. A free cup of coffee for someone who looked like they might make a desperate choice. A phone call to the right social services contact when he recognized the signs of someone in real trouble. Saturday, February 18th started like any other shift. Walter arrived at 10:50 p.m., relieved the evening cashier, and settled in for another night serving his community. The temperature had dropped to single digits, and a steady snow was keeping all but the most determined customers at home. Business was quiet. A few regulars, some delivery drivers, the usual late-night crowd. Walter used the calm periods to organize inventory, update the lottery machine, and keep watch over the parking lot through the security system. Around 12:45 a.m., he noticed something that set off alarms in his experienced mind. A stolen car report had come across the police scanner app he kept on his phone. Dark blue sedan, Michigan plates, last seen in the area. The same car that had been parked across the street for the past 10 minutes with its engine running. Walter had learned to trust his instincts over 30 years of police work. Something wasn't right. At 1:20 a.m., 3 young men entered the store, together. They moved with the kind of nervous energy Walter recognized immediately. Too much attention to the cameras, too much awareness of who else was in the store, spreading out in a pattern that controlled the exits. Walter had seen it 1,000 times before. He continued stocking cigarettes behind the counter, but every sense was now fully alert. These weren't customers. "Evening, gentlemen. Nasty weather out there tonight." "Yeah, old man, real nasty. You know what else is nasty? Having to work for a living when there's money just sitting right there on that register." Walter looked at him calmly, adjusting his glasses in the way Dorothy used to say made him look like a wise old owl. "Son, there's maybe $40 in this register. Barely enough to fill up a gas tank these days. Hardly seems worth the trouble you're about to bring yourself." The second gunman, taller and more agitated, pulled out a pistol. "Shut up, Grandpa. This ain't no negotiation." Walter studied the weapon. Cheap, Saturday night special, probably stolen, definitely not well maintained. The kid holding it was shaking. From cold, from drugs, or from fear. All three made him unpredictable. "I understand you boys are in some kind of trouble, but pointing guns at old men isn't going to solve whatever problem brought you here tonight." The third gunman laughed nervously. "Listen to this old fool. Thinks he's going to talk us out of it." Walter had been in this exact situation more times than he could count. Armed criminals, innocent bystanders at risk, split-second decisions that could save lives or end them. The only difference was that now he was on the other side of the badge. But 30 years of training doesn't disappear just because you change careers. "What's your name, son?" "What? Your name? Your mother gave you a name, didn't she? What does she call you?" That's ain't none of your business." "I bet she calls you something nice. Mothers always do. Mine called me her little bear until the day she died. Made me feel special, you know, like I mattered to somebody." Walter was doing what he'd done hundreds of times as a detective, establishing human connection, breaking down the psychological barriers that let people hurt other people, making himself a person rather than a target. "My name's Walter. I've been working here 4 years, and I know just about everybody in this neighborhood. Good people, most of them, working hard, trying to take care of their families, just like your mother's probably trying to take care of you." The gunman started to feel bad about what he was doing and didn't know how to respond. "Stop talking." But Walter could see the crack in the young man's resolve. 30 years of reading people, of knowing when words could do what weapons couldn't. He pressed forward. "How old are you, son? 20? 21? You've got your whole life ahead of you. Don't throw it away for $40 and a charge that'll put you in prison for the next decade." The second gunman was getting nervous. "Man, forget this talking stuff. Let's just take the money and go." Walter shifted his attention to him. "And you, what's your story? You look like you got some education, probably had plans once, dreams. Is this how you plan to achieve them?" That's when he noticed something that changed everything. The third gunman, the one who'd been watching the door, was edging closer to the candy aisle where old Mrs. Chen was shopping, trying to stay invisible behind the potato chip display. Mrs. Chen, 73 years old, diabetic with a heart condition that required medication she bought from Murphy's pharmacy section twice a month, She was probably afraid to move, afraid to run, afraid she'd become a target if she drew attention to herself. Walter had spent 30 years protecting people like Mrs. Chen. He wasn't about to stop now. Detective Thompson made his decision in less than 2 seconds. "Boys, I need you to listen to me very carefully. My name is Detective Walter Thompson, Detroit Police Department, retired. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, and I can tell you exactly how this situation ends if you don't make some better choices right now." The transformation was instantaneous. The elderly cashier disappeared, replaced by someone who had faced down armed criminals for 30 decades.
Walter's posture straightened, his voice carried absolute authority, and his eyes held the kind of steely calm that comes from having survived countless dangerous situations. The gunman stared at him in shock. "That's impossible," the leader stammered. "You're just some old what? Some old man you thought would be easy to intimidate? Son, I was chasing armed robbers through these streets when your parents were in diapers. I've talked suicidal gunmen off bridges, negotiated with hostage takers, and arrested more criminals than you could count in a lifetime." Walter stepped out from behind the counter, moving with purpose despite his age. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to put those weapons on the counter, you're going to walk out of here quietly, and you're going to go home to your families before you make a mistake that ruins the rest of your lives." "We got the guns, old man," the second gunman shouted, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. "And I've got 30 years of experience dealing with scared kids with guns. You want to know the difference between you and me? You're afraid. I'm not." What happened next would be talked about in Detroit PD training sessions for years to come. Walter Thompson, 67 years old, moved with the speed and precision of someone who had spent decades in life-or-death situations. He disarmed the first gunman using techniques that were muscle memory, secured the weapon, and had the young man on the ground in restraints made from zip ties he kept behind the counter for inventory management. The second gunman raised his weapon, but Walter was already moving, using the store's layout to his advantage. 30 years of tactical experience merged with 4 years of intimate knowledge of every aisle, every corner, every potential cover in Murphy's Corner store. "Federal protocols call for backup, but we're 3 minutes from the nearest unit. I can end this before they arrive, or we can wait for them together. Your choice, son." The remaining gunmen looked at each other, then at the elderly man who had somehow become the most dangerous person in the room. Their easy target had vanished, replaced by someone who clearly knew exactly what he was doing. "Drop the weapons," Walter commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had been obeyed in crisis situations for 3 decades. "Now!" They dropped their weapons. 5 minutes later, Detroit PD arrived to find 3 suspects in custody, 0 injuries, and Walter Thompson calmly completing the incident report with the kind of professional competence that made the responding officers look at him twice. "You're Thompson, from the 9th Precinct?" the sergeant asked, recognition dawning in his eyes. Walter adjusted his glasses and straightened his Murphy's uniform shirt. "Retired Detective Thompson, currently employed as a cashier. Just doing my job, Sergeant." The story made local news within hours. Retired detective stops armed robbery at convenience store. But Walter Thompson didn't give interviews, didn't appear on television, didn't seek recognition for what he'd done. He just showed up for his next shift at 10:50 p.m., put on his name tag, and resumed taking care of his neighborhood. Because some people don't retire from protecting others, they just find new ways to do it.